Chapter 4. My Interrupted Flight Toward the Himalayas. Leave your classroom on some trifling pretext and engage a hackney carriage. Stop in the lane where no one in my house can see you. These were my final instructions to Amar Mittar, a high school friend who planned to accompany me to the Himalayas. We had chosen the following day for our flight. Precautions were necessary as my brother Ananta exercised a vigilant eye. He was determined to foil the plans of escape that he suspected were uppermost in my mind. The amulet, like a spiritual yeast, was silently at work within me. I hoped to find amid the Himalayan snows the master whose face often appeared to me in visions. The family was living now in Calcutta, where father had been permanently transferred. Following the patriarchal Indian custom, Ananta had brought his bride to live in our home. There in a small attic room I engaged in daily meditations and prepared my mind for the divine search. The memorable morning arrived with inauspicious rain. Hearing the wheels of Amar's carriage in the road, I hastily tied together a blanket, a pair of sandals, 2 loincloths, a string of prayer beads, Lahari Mahasaya's picture, and a copy of the Bhagavad Gita. This bundle I threw from a 3rd-story window. I ran down the steps and passed my uncle, buying fish at the door. What is the excitement? His gaze roved suspiciously over my person. I gave him a non-committal smile and walked to the lane. Retrieving my bundle, I joined Amar with conspiratorial caution. We drove to the Chandni Chowk, a merchandise center. For months we had been saving our tiffin money to buy English clothes. Knowing that my clever brother could easily play the part of a detective, we thought to outwit him by wearing European garb. On the way to the station, we stopped for my cousin Jotin Ghosh, whom I call Jatinda. He was a new convert longing for a guru in the Himalayas. He donned the new suit we had in readiness. Well camouflaged, we hoped, a deep elation possessed our hearts. All we need now are canvas shoes. I led my companions to a shop displaying rubber-soled footwear. Articles of leather, got only through the slaughter of animals, should be absent on this holy trip. I halted in the street to remove the leather cover from my Bhagavad Gita and the leather straps from my English-made Sola Topi helmet. At the station, we bought tickets to Burdwan, where we planned to transfer for Hardwar in the Himalayan foothills. As soon as the train, like ourselves, was in flight, I gave utterance to a few of my glorious anticipations. Just imagine, I ejaculated, we shall be initiated by the masters and experience the trance of cosmic consciousness. Our flesh will be charged with such magnetism that wild animals of the Himalayas will come tamely near us. Tigers will be no more than meek house cats awaiting our caresses. This remark, picturing a prospect I considered entrancing, both metaphorically and literally, brought an enthusiastic smile from Amar. But Jatinda averted his gaze, directing it through the window at the scampering landscape. Let the money be divided in 3 portions. Jatinda broke a long silence with this suggestion. Each of us should buy his own ticket in Burdwan. Thus no one at the station will surmise that we are running away together. I unsuspectingly agreed. At dusk our train stopped at Burdwan. Jatinda entered the ticket office. Amar and I sat on the platform. We waited 15 minutes, then made unavailing inquiries. Searching in all directions, we shouted Jatinda's name with the urgency of fright. But he had faded into the dark unknown surrounding the little station. I was completely unnerved, shocked to a peculiar numbness. That God would countenance this depressing episode? The romantic occasion of my first carefully planned flight after him was cruelly marred. Amar, we must return home. I was weeping like a child. Jatinda's careless departure is an ill omen. This trip is doomed to failure. Is this your love for the Lord? Can't you stand the little test of a treacherous companion? Through Amar's suggestion of a divine test, my heart steadied itself. We refreshed ourselves with famous Burdwan sweetmeats, Sita Bhog and Motichur. In a few hours we entrained for Hardwar via Bareilly. Changing trains the following day at Mughal Sarai, we discussed a vital matter as we waited on the platform. Amar, we may soon be closely questioned by railway officials. I am not underrating my brother's ingenuity. No matter what the outcome, I will not speak untruth. All I ask of you, Mukund, is to keep still. Don't laugh or grin while I am talking." At this moment, a European station agent accosted me. He waved a telegram whose import I immediately grasped. "Are you running away from home in anger?" "No." I was glad his choice of words permitted me to make emphatic reply. Not anger, but divinest melancholy was responsible, I knew, for my unconventional behavior. The official then turned to Amar. The duel of wits that followed hardly permitted me to maintain the counselled stoic gravity. "Where is the third boy?" The man injected a full ring of authority into his voice. "Come now, speak the truth." "Sir, I notice you are wearing eyeglasses. Can't you see that we are only two?" Amar smiled impudently. "I am not a magician. I can't conjure up a third boy." The official, noticeably disconcerted by this impertinence, sought a new field of attack. "What is your name?" "I am called Thomas. I am the son of an English mother and a converted Christian Indian father." "What is your friend's name?" "I call him Thompson." By this time my inward mirth had reached a zenith. I unceremoniously made for the train, which was providentially whistling for departure. Amar followed with the official, who was credulous and obliging enough to put us into a European compartment. It evidently pained him to think of two half-English boys travelling in the section allotted to natives. After his polite exit, I lay back on the seat and laughed uproariously. Amar wore an expression of blithe satisfaction at having outwitted a veteran European official. On the platform, I had contrived to read the telegram from my brother Ananta. It went thus: "3 Bengali boys in English clothes running away from home toward Hardwar via Mughal. Please detain them until my arrival. Ample reward for your services." "Amar, I told you not to leave marked timetables in your home." My glance was reproachful. Brother must have found one there. My friend sheepishly acknowledged the thrust. We halted briefly in Bareilly, where Dwarka Prasad awaited us with a telegram from Ananta. Dwarka tried valiantly to detain us. I convinced him that our flight had not been undertaken lightly. As on a previous occasion, Dwarka refused my invitation to set out for the Himalayas. While our train stood in a station that night and I was half asleep, Amar was awakened by another questioning official. He too fell a victim to the hybrid charms of Thomas and Thompson. The train bore us triumphantly into a dawn arrival at Hardwar. The majestic mountains loomed invitingly in the distance. We dashed through the station and entered the freedom of city crowds. Our first act was to change into native costume, as Ananta had somehow penetrated our European disguise. A premonition of capture weighed on my mind. Deeming it advisable to leave Hardwar at once, we bought tickets to proceed north to Rishikesh, a soil long hallowed by the feet of many masters. I had already boarded the train, while Amar lagged on the platform. He was brought to an abrupt halt by a shout from a policeman. An unwelcome guardian, the officer escorted Amar and me to a police station bungalow and took charge of our money. He explained courteously that it was his duty to hold us until my elder brother arrived. Learning that the truant's destination had been the Himalayas, the officer related a strange story. "I see you are crazy about saints. You will never meet a greater man of God than the one I saw only yesterday. My brother officer and I first encountered him 5 days ago. We were patrolling by the Ganges on a sharp lookout for a certain murderer. Our instructions were to capture him alive or dead. He was known to be masquerading as a sadhu in order to rob pilgrims. A short way before us we spied a figure that resembled the description of the criminal. He ignored our command to stop. We ran to overpower him. Approaching his back, I wielded my axe with tremendous force. The man's right arm was severed almost completely from his body. Without outcry or any glance at the ghastly wound, the stranger astonishingly continued his swift pace. As we jumped in front of him, he spoke quietly. "I am not the murderer you are seeking." I was deeply mortified to see I had injured the person of a divine-looking sage. Prostrating myself at his feet, I implored his pardon and offered my turban cloth to staunch the heavy spurts of blood.